Hey there everyone, and welcome back. In today's episode of D&D Horror Stories, we have a variety of tales, ranging from simps fawning over a new player in an ongoing campaign, to DMs with strange views on how to approach players of the opposite sex. Though, before we get into that, this chart shows that a lot of you aren't yet subscribed, and Nipsey is wondering why.
Just subscribe already. I really like this ball.
So subscribe today. To do otherwise would be to let Nipsey down. But with the preamble out of the way, let's get right into these stories. DM finds out about my fetish, repeatedly throws my character into suggestive situations, then leaves when confronted. By Reddit user, Wet Latte. This is gonna be a weird one, so hang tight. I'm into wet look. It's a mild fetish, which basically makes me turned on when I'm swimming or bathing with my clothes on. To each their own, I say. It's harmless, and I mostly keep it to myself, but for the past few months, I've also been writing ridiculous over-the-top erotic stories about it online. Initially, I did it just for fun, but eventually people started offering money for customs, so I turned it into a side hustle. And it's been pretty lucrative so far. Recently, my D&D group started a new campaign. Our DM told us to send him backstories for a review, and I accidentally sent him one of the erotic stories I had written. I deleted the message, praying that he didn't have the time to download it. Then I sent him the correct file, and he just responded with the thumbs up. I thought that I was out of the woods. Then came the first session. I was the only girl in the group, and the rest were guys, with the exception of the host wife, who didn't play but stayed to watch. I was playing a human sorcerer, and I had her wear some fancy robes she had stolen from a noblewoman at some point. It was a desert campaign, and the first encounter involved an oasis. After we defeated a band of minor jackal wares, the DM states that I felt some kind of power emanating from the center of the oasis. I ask if there was a way to get to the center of the oasis without swimming, and the DM says that there were some rocks sticking out of the water, which I could traverse. I ask how many rocks there are, and the DM says 10. I decide to jump from rock to rock in an attempt to get to the source. The DM has me do a dexterity check for every damn rock. I succeed for the first 3, but then I fail on the 4th. As I fall into the oasis water, the DM describes how my robes become wet, change color, and become heavy, and then asks me if I want to stay in the water or try to get out. It felt kind of off, but I brush it off and say that I swim over to the source. We discover the source of power is some sort of portal, and at some point, we go through and find ourselves in some sort of underground temple. Fast forward a few minutes, and there is a pool of water between us and another door, with a narrow rope bridge leading across. We decide to traverse the bridge one by one, with me being last. And guess what? The bridge breaks, and I end up in the pool. As I clamber out to the other side and walk towards the rest of the party, the DM proceeds to vividly describe how my dripping wet clothes wrap around me, squeaking as I walk, and so on. At this point, I'm uncomfortable and ask him to stop because it's kind of weird, and the other guys agree. He frowns, but admits that he's gone too far. The next week, we have another session. We're still in the temple, and we're facing some water elementals, because of course we are. Their attacks target me more often than I'd like, and the DM again makes remarks to how wet I am. At this point, I'm about to speak up when the host wife tells the DM to stop because I'm visibly uncomfortable. The dude throws a fit, picks up his stuff, and leaves. I'm still not sure why he did it. It's statistically unlikely that we share the same kink, so I just think this was some poor attempt to seduce me. Whatever the case, we never played with him again. Well, I would certainly fetch the guess that the DM did see what OP accidentally sent before she was able to delete it. Though any normal person would have just let it be and just continue on with the campaign and forget about it. but it does sound like this DM used it to build an entire quest in order to quote-unquote flirt with OP, and right in front of his wife no less. But instead of taking the criticism after that first session, and let it be water under the bridge, he continued with the epic flirting skills and still made OP uncomfortable. I bet you the DM and his wife had one hell of a fight that night, and he was probably a level 1 up against a 10 challenge rating. Let's move on. Guy makes a character that doesn't follow the rules and gets mad when he can't play it. By Reddit user 3 Imps in a Trench Coat. This was a long time ago, but talking about D&D earlier today made me think of it. I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember exact details of the conversation. I was running a 3.5 D&D game with a homebrew setting, and one of my players mentioned it to their coworker. The coworker wanted to join, so the player asks me, and I say yes. I talked to the guy a bit via text and explained the rules of the setting and character creation. Which variant rules are being used, significant homebrew, classes and races that aren't available, etc. He grumbles a little, but not too bad, when I mention that we don't include pretty much anything from Eberron, like Artificer, Dragon Marks, pretty much anything. He says he'll probably play a wizard or something, and I say cool, see you Saturday. My player mentions at some point that the guy seems excited, but shady, and we figure he made some gimmick or min-max character. But it was nothing that we can't handle. He just says that it's a spellcaster. Not knowing wasn't that weird, so I didn't give the situation much thought. Then game day rolls around. The dude shows up, and has some kind of smug attitude. He reveals that he's playing an artificer. He explains, like it's some kind of gotcha, that he came from a portal from Eberron. His face drops when I reiterate that the artificer class is not an option. He continues arguing about the portal to Eberron, the D&D multiverse, and crystal spheres from Spelljammer. He gets mad. I guess he expected me to be like, "Oh, you? You got me." He storms out, and from what I heard, he got mad again when he found out that his invitation had been retracted. Well, this story basically boils down to, hey, you can play, just don't do this thing. Oh, cool. Hey look, I did the thing. But I told you not to do thing. Don't matter, you gotta let me do the thing. No, I don't. No fair, I'm leaving. Okay. Let's move on. Simps Derail a Campaign by Reddit user Silas Dane. The cast is as follows. Placeholder names are used. DM, she was in a relationship with Leon at the time. Peter, Paladin and Rogue, role-playing as PTSD twins. Co-DM and Simp number 1. Leon, Bard, Simp number 2. Amy, Sorceress, the target of affection from the Simps. Dave, Warlock, Amy's boyfriend at the time, who stayed quiet throughout everything and did not voice any opinion over the matter. And myself, Female Samurai, Bystander. Quick context. This was a character-driven homebrew campaign, part 2 of a previous campaign. That one has a horror story of its own, with a player that was the "I have no reason to join party for X activity" mindset, and it was a modern fantasy setting. This is my 3rd ever D&D campaign, so I'm not very experienced at this time. DM was very good friends with Peter before the first campaign. The story. After the horror of part 1 of the homebrew campaign, and subsequent ban of a player, everyone was ready to put everything behind us and continue forward for the anticipated part 2 of our campaign. We had sort of bonded over the chaos and became friends. Peter and Leon wanted to invite 2 people to the campaign, and the DM accepted their request. In comes Amy and Dave, who are great people when I first meet them, both artists and very chill, and they were in a relationship. After going through with character creations with them, we were ready to begin session 0. It wasn't until about the 5th session, and when I began to notice the red flags. By this time, all important NPCs had been introduced, and we were on our quest to search for the 7 stones that contained an aspect of power. One thing our DM encouraged was roleplay outside of the sessions to get to know each other's characters well as give key plot elements that were relevant to certain player characters. This would prove to be the starting point of disaster. Unbeknownst to myself, Amy and Peter had begun to engage in this activity to the extreme. For example, I'd go to bed that night, notice that they were in a chat room on our Discord server designated for side roleplay, and the next morning, they were still there. This occurred for the next couple of days until the DM decided to investigate, more as a welfare check than anything else, since that isn't exactly healthy. She stumbled in on the 2 erotic role-playing and reprimanded them for the extremely inappropriate behavior. Both Peter and Amy snapped back at her that it was none of the DM's business. DM gave them their first strike and warned that any more strikes would result in kicking them from the campaign. This would set the tone for the rest of the campaign's short lifespan. Outside of the server, away from the supervision of the DM, Amy and Peter made a private Discord and continued their activities and advancing character development between their characters way outside of the progress of the main story. Eventually, Leon, the DM's boyfriend, included himself in on the shenanigans without the DM being aware of her boyfriend's hangouts with friends activities. Fast forward, and Peter, Amy, and Leon began ghosting the DM. This was an issue because whenever DM had a question about how to use a bot system on the Discord server that we utilized for combat, Peter refused to use Roll20. Peter was ghosting her. Then, he would become frustrated with DM when the session was halted because of a confusion with the bot system that she asked him for help with days prior to the sessions. At this time, Leon also began favoring hanging out with Amy, Peter, and Dave outside of our D&D sessions. Later, Peter would begin asking DM to give Amy's player character equipment that was clearly overpowered for our level and progress in the story. When DM refused, I began to notice a gradual disinterest in continuing the main story from the 3 players, Amy, Peter, and Leon. They began to favor their side roleplay sessions that the DM and I were convinced were just threesome sessions. By this point in the main story, we had found 2 of the 7 stones, and learned that 2 more of them were fused into a very important NPC who was a member of our party. I learned that they had discovered that this important NPC had the stones of life and death, which meant he was virtually immortal. What did the player characters proceed to do with the information? Kill him over and over again whenever the NPC annoyed them, as if he was an emotional punching bag. The DM was trying to get them to continue the main story through the NPC. This was my first and last intervention to get them to knock it all off, to no avail. They continued to torture the NPC this way, and any continued protest from myself earned me a threat of PvP from Amy and Peter. Not even the DM could stop them. It was out of control at this point. This was also the final straw, and the DM dropped the campaign by giving us one of the possible endings to the main story. The BBEG was actually the other one of our 2 NPC party members this whole time, who possessed the stone of the fire aspect, and my player character's love interest. He declared that his patience had grown thin with the 3 offending player characters, and revealed his identity to the party. He ripped the 2 stones out of the important NPC, and used the power of death to kill the 3 player characters, and vanished, leaving my PC and Dave's PC shaken and shocked at what just happened. After that, the DM exploded at Leon first, and then Peter and Amy, then apologized to Dave and myself, and left the server. I left shortly after. TLDR, Peter, Amy, and Leon were responsible for derailing a great campaign due to out-of-session activities. Peter and Leon simped for Amy, and when confronted, Amy justified their behavior as, "We're adults, we can do as we please," while disregarding the rules. Amy was also a perpetrator of persuading Leon that DM was not right for him. Edit. The DM did more behind the scenes than what I originally posted that she has made known to me. I didn't feel it was necessary to include it at the time of making this post, however. While I'll admit that I felt that there was a lot of leniency, I concluded that it was because she and Peter were good friends at the time. There was also a lot happening that we were unaware of, like the private Discord they had created did not come to light until towards the end of our campaign's lifespan. This was after the DM tightened her enforcement of the rules. When Peter let slip that he and Amy's player characters were having developments unbeknownst to the DM, she questioned them. Thus the discovery of their side activities on a separate private Discord came to light. A second strike with a final warning was issued, and the decanonization of weeks worth of player character development that happened outside of the supervision of the DM followed. As you can imagine, they did not take this well, with Amy going as far to call DM controlling and abusive to Leon. The downhill spiral plummeted even faster after that, leading to the unfortunate climax of our campaign. Holy God, talk about throwing a lit match into a powder keg. Now, I can understand two consenting adults doing some erotic roleplay with each other, but it sounded like Peter and Amy were doing it in a public thread on their Discord for all to see, so I can understand the DM telling them to stop. But at the same time, it is a bit sus for someone to erotic roleplay with other people when they are in a relationship like Amy was with Dave. Then the fact that Leon secretly went into that private Discord to join in with the erotic roleplay while he was in a relationship with DM is also a bit scummy. It's no wonder that DM and him broke up afterwards. All in all, the story is full of bad people all around, and I can understand why the DM decided to end the campaign where she did, rather than keep trying to save it. But with that said, let's move on. Guys Can't Play Female Characters by Reddit user 777Zenon777. So, this is a short and straightforward story. I recently joined a D&D campaign, and after the session 0, the DM asked us to prepare the ideas that we have for our characters and send them to him, and then he would contact us and help us adjust them to his world. So far so good. I had an idea for a paladin character. I wrote the character and I sent it to the DM yesterday. Today, the DM spoke to me, saying that the idea was okay, but had one little question. He asked me if I was a woman. Well, I was a bit surprised because we had already talked and he knew that I was not, but once again, I reminded him to be sure. This was a problem. The DM told me that I have to change my character then, because as a guy, I shouldn't be playing a female character. He gave several reasons for this. The first one was that I wouldn't be able to do a female voice for my character, which is okay. He doesn't know how to do female voices for his NPCs, but whatever. He also told me that, in his opinion, it is cringe, and that when guys play as women, they always try to do some funny stuff with the characters. I suspect I know what he meant, but I assured him that I was not planning anything inappropriate, though that was to no avail. We argued back and forth about it for a while, but finally, the DM told me that he didn't want that at his table, and he wasn't going to change his mind. He likes my ideas though, so I can make another character. Honestly, I know that this is not much of a horror story, nor is it that serious, but I still feel like I don't want to play at his table anymore. Honestly, I can kinda understand where this DM is coming from, as I could see that he might have had an issue in the past with other players playing women characters, and doing inappropriate things in game, so that may be why he has that as a rule. Though at the same time, people can totally play characters as the opposite gender than they are, and do a good job of it. In my current campaign, our paladin is doing so as well, and doesn't do a voice at all, and is still doing a good job of it. Remember, it's an imagination game, and doing voices is not a requirement. Though it does help get into it more. I would say to OP that it's likely that the DM probably just had a bad experience with a player before, so I'd just make a new character and play it, and if the DM sees that you're not a toxic player, then perhaps he'll let you play that character down the line in a future campaign. Though, that's just what I can gather from the story. Have you ever had a game get ruined by someone simping on another player? Or has a DM ever gotten to creepy levels in your game? If so, and you would like your story to be shared on the channel, be sure to post a link in the comments, on the channel subreddit, or even feel free to contact me on Twitter. As always, I appreciate all of you, and Lucky doesn't want to feel left out. Until next time.